Jon Tyson, I have been waiting and excited for this interview because I think the last time we were together was in Edmonton, Alberta, in
Yeah,
Canada, at the Breakforth
yeah.
Conference. And I interviewed you on one of the fruit of the Spirit, which was really great. You were very thoughtful and wise. But the other time was, remember, and I don't know if you remember, I was in New York City. It was a church planting conference. And you were speaking, and I think I came up to you because I'd remembered you from my last women's show,
Yes,
Full Circle,
straight
that you
up.
were on.
That's the one I really remember. Come on, Rumors of God. That was my first TV
Exactly.
appearance. It was a very bad experience for me. I didn't know what I was doing. Bad answers, the whole thing.
Really? You thought so?
Yes,
And we thought you were great, and you were surrounded by all these women on this couch in Canada.
yes,
But you did
that
well.
was
You did well.
probably maybe 10 years ago, a decade ago. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. So you know what? Then maybe I'll chalk it up that we set you up for success, for good communication,
Yes.
because
You
you
prepped
you
me.
had
You
it
teed
there.
me up. I'm grateful. The legacy lives on.
Yeah, and then it was great interviewing you for our show. And can you believe we're celebrating our 5 year anniversary
Wow.
now? 7 seasons. So you were a part of kind of like the earlier season, and now this year it's five
Well,
years since I launched
congrats on
the show.
keeping it going. I mean, gosh, it's been a hard couple of years, and so seeing this sort of like thrive and go to the next level is a real joy.
Thank you, thank you. So how are you? I've been before we get into your new book, The Intentional Father. I just wanted to know how you're doing. How did your family and church manage through the pandemic? Maybe just a quick catch
Yeah,
up.
well, thanks for asking. Gosh, it's just been a wild 2 years. I mean, I was in Hawaii right before the week before the pandemic sort of like kicked off. And changed our flights, came back to the city, and then we did one live stream to sort of test the tech. And to celebrate this epic event, we did a group photo. And in that group photo, it's a picture of us all getting COVID because someone in that photo had it. So it kicked off with like very, very severe sickness. My wife was very, very sick. I mean, should have been hospitalized, but was like, I'm not going to a hospital. Back then, there was so much fear, there was so much uncertainty about COVID. I woke up and I couldn't taste or smell anything, and I was like, what has happened to me? I had all this cologne on, and then I came out and I was like, my cologne's broken. And everyone in my house was like, you stink. What is wrong with you? But I didn't know back then that COVID made you lose this is in
Yeah.
March 2020. It was a very painful time. The city was just traumatized. I mean, I'm still honestly still like processing some of the deep things, like what happened to me, what it did on my heart. But we're through it. I've since become an empty nester, dropped my daughter off to college. Um, it's been a wild season of just rapid change, a lot of pain, a lot of highs, but mainly a lot of lows. But by God's grace, we've come through it like in a pretty good spot to relaunch. We just fully brought our church back after 18 months, 4 services, did a leaders launch
Wow.
day, and it was really, really rich to see everyone. And the weirdest thing is seeing people's kids who they were 2 when I saw them. Now they're almost twice the age, twice the size. I was like, so it's been, the city's bouncing back. It certainly feels like it's doing a lot better than a lot of other places I read about. My parents are in Australia. Australia feels like it's still under disaster. Like I don't know if their plan is to perpetually lock down its citizens. It's really,
Well,
really
we are.
wild. So,
Yeah, it's like us here.
mm,
It's in
mm.
Canada, and we're still in lockdowns and not necessarily lockdowns, but just restrictions. I'm curious if I can ask you this for church because I've been having lots of conversations with people about church that we have to really change the way we do church. That a lot of people after this pandemic, a lot of pastors and people in ministry are like, I don't know if I can go on. What has been your experience? Sort of this. We've used the word pivoting a lot, but what has been sort of the biggest sort of pivot for you? Maybe some encouragement because I have a lot of people in ministry and pastors who are really struggling, John,
Did
today.
I just see that you had Henry and Alex Seeley on?
Yes, I
You know
did.
that they're
Yes,
some
we
of
did.
my closest friends from my teenage
Oh,
years.
really? Oh, they were wonderful. They were
Yes.
they were great to chat with.
Well, I mean, I bring that up because we're all from the same church, the same youth group. Alex was my small group leader. I used to go surfing every weekend with Henry when we were teenagers. And my guess is they had the same sort of response that I had. One of the things I'm very grateful for from the Pentecostal tradition is sort of like the vision of an overcoming spirit, which is like, Caleb's like, let's believe the good report. Let's believe the promises. It's not naive. It doesn't deny reality or like just bypass it, but it does believe that God can get us through it. I'm very grateful for that sort of like gift of faith in that tradition. But it's very hard if a lot of friends drop out. And so I think one of the things I heard Tim Keller say very early on, and this just shaped basically how I've lived the last year and a half. He said, Christians, when crisis has happened, Christians are born for crises. We have heroic responses. We have an instinct of sacrificial love. We just pour out, give up, serve. He said, but what he noticed after 9/11 is that everybody, when the adrenaline sort of ran out, it was the people like a year and a half later, 2 years later, who all dropped out. And it was sort of like a warning, like if you just rely on natural power, if you're just gritting it and gutting it out, he's like 2 years from now, you'll bail. And so I think I consciously said, I need to pace myself. I need to enjoy Jesus as the deep part of this. I need to rest in the middle of this. I cannot let the crisis become the only crisis of my heart. I've got to find joy in it. I've got to look for beauty in the midst of the pain. So I think I consciously started doing that in March or April, and I'm telling you, it has sustained me and saved me. I'm very grateful. I'm coming out of the pandemic with a very full heart, with a lot of energy. I'm very grateful. But I think it's I probably underled a little bit. I wanted to do more, but I'm trying to play a long game. I'm trying to put another 25 years into pastoring here in New York. And so I was like, I don't want to just like go so hard that I sabotage my future in some heroic effort in the short term. So yeah, it was very hard to like have that balance of like leading, stepping up, sacrificing, but also realizing I've got to lead something to rebuild on the other side of this. And so it's only because of the wisdom of mentors and friends that I think I was able to make those adjustments and do that and be where I am right now.
That's really encouraging, John. Sort of the long game, because I think a lot of people were sort of like short-sighted and saying, we've got to just get through it. Now we do, but I think in that, you're right, a lot of energy was expended, a lot of just trying to deal with all the chaos and unpredictability, and a lot of energy, emotional, spiritual, physical, and mental, just sort of like, and now I'm just seeing, so much really exhaustion, burnout.
Totally.
And we're going into a new season, and we're like, now we're gearing up, right? Everybody's trying to gear up, and people really, I was in one of my church meetings, they were just like, we cannot give anymore. Like, we are spent beyond. Totally. And
yes.
I can't lead a small group, Melinda. I can't do it.
It's so true. It's one of those things, when you're doing well, hard things are easy. But when you're tired, easy things are hard. You just can't do it. And, if you're in a fight and you're in round 10 and you're just getting beaten up, you have one thought, and you know what it is? Stop the pain. And I think there's a lot of folks right now who are sort of in stop the pain mode. They're just like, folks have taken so much criticism in leadership. They're just like, who am I even doing this for? It just feels like ungrateful, critical people. But I think I'm very grateful to have, coaches and mentors to give me perspective in the midst of this. How do you differentiate yourself from people's pain? How do you love them? How do you put boundaries in place? So I think the wisdom of the mentors has like in many ways saved my soul during this period. And I would say to people, like, if you need to rest, you're better off to step out now and regain your heart and put another 20 years in than just grind it through out of obligation and then tap out in 3 years. So be honest with yourself, acknowledge where you are and who you are, and have a plan for sort of restoration, not just escape. And I think that God's strength shows up in our weakness. But as long as we're honest about it, we've got to say, help, Holy Spirit, help. No, I can take it from here. And so, it is very, I've got a lot of empathy for pastors and Christian leaders and everybody, but I'm a pastor. So these are sort of like my people getting through these last 18 months.
John, that's good thoughts, not just for us in this time of pandemic, but that wisdom could have been said to many pastors pre-COVID who have been trying to like push it out into the work and are feeling burnt. We're burnt out and exhausted before the pandemic. and now they're faced with this, and it's just compounded, even more. But that's actually really good wisdom, good advice. And even for myself, I think what was interesting when I was faced with a crisis, I'm pretty good at kind of stepping in and going, assessing, and then going and leading a team. And our team did more during the COVID time than any time before. We wrote a book. We did webinars. We did more podcasts. We did more shows, John. Like my team's just like, what is happening? Like I was like, rally, let's go, let's do it. Because we also had, in a good way, I had some time to pause and stop, because the whole world stopped, which got me some moments to go assess what's the need, how can we best care and speak into culture and bring kindness and hope to people. But I was going so much like this, and actually the COVID kind of screeching halt, and then I was able to kind of like assess the landscape and go, this is the most effective way and means to connect with people.
Yeah, I mean, for content creators, this was genuinely like maybe the opportunity of a lifetime. And I think some folks might have underutilized the opportunity side of things. Why wouldn't you write a book? I mean, this was my great fear. I said, I don't want, when my grandchildren ask me, Grandpa, what did you do during the great pandemic, to only be able to list off all the Netflix shows that I watched. I wanted to be able to say, like, here's some stuff I did, So I wrote a book. You're holding it, maybe, or it's near you somewhere. I mean, I wanted to sort of redeem the time and focus on things. That being said, man, I got grace for however you got through this thing. Do you know what I mean? I mean, you can't change it now. You can't go back now. All you can do is receive new mercies for today, reset your heart, and then lean into what's in front of you. But yeah, I mean, I tend to be a doer. New York's one of those places that sort of, revs a little higher. And yeah, I just would encourage people, and one thing, like one of my mentors has been saying that a lot of people don't talk about, he says, what if this is the start of the pandemic, not the end? Like, what's your plan for the next 3 years? Do you have enough energy in the tank right now? Have you made the adjustments? Have you figured out there's an idea Jim Collins talks about in his book, Great by Choice, tells the story of the two folks trying to get to the South Pole, and he talks about the 20-mile march. I don't know if you're familiar with that story, but I've sort of figured, so he basically says there was two people with two different strategies trying to get to the South Pole. One of them traveled, when the weather was good, they'd do 40 miles a day. And then when it was bad, they'd sit in a tent for 4 or 5 days and wait for it to clear up. Very inconsistent, very sporadic, relied on external circumstances to dictate the journey. And another guy in his preparation said, we're doing 20 miles a day, period. If it's sunny or if it's snowing, we're doing 20 miles. And he sort of basically got his people to a pace of consistency that wasn't dependent on the circumstances to deliver their vision, their mission. And so, and that group didn't win by a little bit. It was like one group died, the other group broke all the world records. Like the delta, the gap between having that mentality was like life or death. So I've sort of got my own version of like, here's my 20-mile march, and here's the stuff I do regardless of the season. And that's given me sort of a sacred pace in the midst of everything. And, some days it's a little more intense. Obviously, you're dealing with people in crisis. But for the most part, it's like a pretty steady focus on mission, ministry, and just staying the course for the long haul.
That's good, because I've been told that the Spanish flu lasted 7 years.
Dang.
Just
Dang.
and there was 7. So here we are, sort of 2, and what is it going to look like as we prepare, potentially for more things to come in 3-5 years? So that's really good advice. Now, talked about a book. I want to get there because I think it's fantastic about being an intentional father. I love that David Kinnaman did your forward, because David actually pre-COVID came to our studio and did a whole big event with all these attendees about why young people were leaving the church. Yeah. He gave such great insight. So I love that he did the forward. It makes so much sense in your story and your book and having him there. So fantastic.
Yeah, he's such a great guy.
Isn't he great? Yes. He was so much fun. We joked a lot. We were like, it was so great. And we had like a packed out audience that came. I mean, a lot of like pastors and ministry leaders, and it was just like so many aha moments when he shared. So anyway, I was thrilled that he did your forward. But I'm going to do some quick questions to you, and you can say some short answers, because I want to kind of find out you being a dad and your thoughts about being a dad. and then we'll get into your book on sort of these 5 areas you've identified to be an intentional father. So, Jon.
But just before you ask, just so you know, it's very hard for me to give short answers. I'm like in a tour. I give 3 answers last an hour, so let me do my best here. Let me get ready.
Okay. Well, when I say short, it doesn't have to be like yes, no.
Okay, gotcha.
But you know what I mean.
Gotcha.
Okay, ready?
Yep.
Jon, number 1, the best thing about being a dad.
Revelation of the Father's heart. Tangible encounter of God's heart for me.
That's good. Nicely done. That was like answer. Strong and powerful. Great. Number 2, the toughest part about being a dad.
Kids rebelling. Just like when your kids make unwise choices, the level of nothing in my life I've ever experienced has wounded me more deeply than my kids' rebellion.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're like, that wasn't strong and powerful.
Jon, that was strong and powerful.
No, it's like that.
We're gonna like kind of unpack
hard,
that
yeah.
as we start talking through the book, because I have a 14 and 17-year-old.
Oh, you're in it.
14 daughter, 17-year-old son. So we're in some interesting waters and times right now, Jon. Okay, how about this one? Number 3, the one thing you really can't understand about Gen Z, or is questionable. Words, memes, what they watch on YouTube. What would you say? You can't understand, or you just are like, what?
You know, I spend so much time trying to understand Gen Z, and because I have kids who are Gen Z, I'm pretty obsessed with understanding them. So I feel like I understand them. If I could tweak the question, it would be like, what do I have the most empathy for Gen Z?
Okay,
it would
good.
be
That's
like they have no idea what technology is doing to their brains. You know, like I have tremendous sadness about how their brains are being rewired to not be able to concentrate because of the utilization of technology.
Yeah, that's a good one. Good one. Okay, on that then, you've sort of answered it, but more specifically, one thing that encourages you and excites you about Gen Z.
I think that they have like a global vision, that they're aware of the world in a way other generations aren't. That's the upside of technology. They're connected to people everywhere. And so they have a huge sense of both responsibility to people, to the planet, and to each other. And yeah, like just a way bigger worldview and appreciation of like what's actually happening. I think that's a huge gift. I would have thrived in that with my personality if that was available to me as a kid, but it wasn't really.
Could you imagine, Jon, what that have been meant? Like I somebody told me the other day that like I actually got on Facebook in 2007 and then Instagram later, and talking to kids who like I never knew about Google. We still went to the library. I couldn't access it. We were faxing information back and forth to get information. The Dewey Decimal System, like all of these things.
It's wild.
And I was thinking to myself, wild, because I was like, if I'd had that information just for my schooling and just the way that I'm curious about the world, would have been so interesting at that time in my life.
I remember getting an email address when I moved to America. This is in 97, okay, 24 years ago. And I just remember thinking, this will never catch on. This is like who's going to use this? Have to log on. It's too much drama. You know, it turns out I never said that again. I've never said this will never catch on again.
Was the email a Yahoo address?
Straight up. It was like Johnny Tyson at yahoo.com. I still have a Yahoo account. It's like the one I use.
No, you don't.
The one I use for all the required like emails that you have to get, subscription emails or whatever. So that's like my spamish one.
Can I say something that's actually personal but kind of crazy, and I've never shared this?
Bring it on.
A few months ago, this is how bad. I had to contact MySpace because I had a picture.
They still have someone you can contact there?
No, here's what's crazy, Jon. I had a picture of myself and my ex-husband still up as my profile pic.
On MySpace?
And when people Googled me, that picture was still coming up because it was still kind of working, how it is.
The algorithm has it.
MySpace. And so I had to contact the person and try to figure out and have to look about how to remove a picture from MySpace.
Did it work?
Okay.
Did it work?
It did. It's gone. It's gone.
Dang.
There's a new picture now of me and my my husband, my current husband now, it's just beautiful and better. But that's what I mean. It was
How is
like,
that
and when
stuff
it
still
came up,
floating
I'm like,
around on the ethic?
MySpace.
That's how you get fired. It's stuff you wrote
I don't
15
know.
years ago. I remember my last, I think, MySpace entry it's Columbus Circle. Columbus Circle. I think it's
Yeah.
2004. And I'm saying, I will move to New York City and plant a church in Soho and the Upper West Side. That's like the
No.
last thing. And then I never got a church in Soho, but I did start one on the Upper West Side. So,
That's
yeah,
amazing. Well, there wasn't anything. I think I kind of like erased everything on MySpace, but the picture still
that's
is there. So
crazy.
anyway, fascinating. Okay. I want to ask this too, and then and come into the book. But this intentional father, like, what does that mean? Intentional and present. We use intentional for things like let's be intentional about in works, in work conversations, or intentional in being a good friend. But what does it mean to be an intentional father, John?
Well, I wanted to start by saying, look, the stakes in fatherhood right now are so high. The stakes are so high for forming our young people. Almost 70%
Mm-hmm.
of them walk away from their faith when they go off to university. The church, I mean, you were talking about David Kinnaman being there. The church is hemorrhaging a generation. And I don't say that like an alarmist because the institution of the Western Church or whatever. I say it out of love for these people. They were created by God to know Him and enjoy Him, and they're going to be going after these other things that ultimately do not satisfy, that lead to spiritual disaster, separation from God. So yeah, the stakes are so high. It's such an important moment. So I feel like I basically sat down. I said, well, what are the alternatives? If you're not intentional, what are you? So I basically opened the book by talking about 5 kinds of dads, parents, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, they're irresponsible. There's an irresponsible parent who just doesn't care, and they just basically bail on their kids. Then you get ignorant parents. These are ones who just don't know what they're doing, do a lot of damage because they just do not have the tools or understanding to raise kids well. Then I talk about inconsistent parents. These are those that are in and out, driven by their own addictions or ambitions. Or I just watched a documentary, a tragic documentary, about a guy whose kids, he goes to prison, and then 15 years later, he goes back to prison for 18 months. And in that 18 months, his kids say, he comes out and all of his kids are just falling apart. And they all say it's because my dad was just inconsistent. He wasn't here these 18 months. I was like, dang, there's so much heartache connected to that. Then I talk about involved parents. This is like your typical good parent. They're around. They do the sex talk. They show up at games. They, talk about your friends, those sorts of things. But as good as that is, oftentimes kids can feel, or teenagers can feel in particular, deeply misunderstood because the parent is prescribing out of general wisdom or from their own story. They're projecting their understanding of childhood or adolescence onto their kids instead of saying, who are you? What are you going through? How do I understand these complexities? So I'm just saying intentionality is basically asking, who has God given me? What is their destiny? How do I design something to help prepare and form them in it? And then how do I walk them through that into adulthood? So to me, that's the basic vision, intentionality. And you nailed it. We do it for everything else. If you were to say to like a person in the middle of their career, like, what are your plans for your career? People, very rarely are people going to go, I don't know, man. I'm just kind of like just going to wing it and just see what's up. People like in New York, it's like you go to the right kindergarten to get to the right elementary school, to get to the right middle school, to get to the right high school, to get to the Ivies, to get to the right internship, to get to the right firm. I mean, the intentionality with vocation is off the charts. I don't know why we don't do that with our kids. So, yeah.
So I love that, and I know that comes up again in sort of like in recognition. But why did you write it? I mean, obviously this comes out of personal
Yeah.
experience, but why now, and why did you write it?
Well, I think there was 3 reasons. Number one is like I loved my son. So when I started this with Nate, like I don't think I'd ever planned to turn this into a book. I just loved him. And I was like, man, I got to design something for my son. He's heading into these teenage years. And if I don't form him, the world will. So I was like, like, how have they done this through church history? Like, what have other cultures done? And I basically realized we have nothing, man. We've thrown this out almost every other society set a conscious, recognized formation pathway from adolescence into adulthood. We're the first society that doesn't really have it. And I was like, that made me scramble to research and read and figure it out. Then I basically took all of that research and then sort of put it together in one place and designed a thing I could walk him through from sort of 13 to 19. So yeah, it was born out of love for my son. Then secondarily, I think I had a lot of dads sort of like eavesdropping or sort of looking in at what I was doing, and they're like, man, I feel like I'm lost. Help. And I at that time was like, I'm like one step ahead, you know. But then I got to the end of my time with my son. This is when we were walking 500 miles across Spain together, doing this like epic Camino journey.
Was it Camino? Did you do the Camino?
Yeah, that's how we closed it out. The Camino.
I've been wanting to do it.
Oh my God. Do you want to do a podcast on the Camino? I'll just weep my way
I have
through
a
it.
couple friends who do the Camino, and I'd love to gather you guys together because I think the experiences are very different
Life-changing.
and very.
Anyway, I was on that and I thought, you know what? I had built a course called the Primal Path. And, you know, it was like $100. It was $200 for the video version or whatever. And I wanted dads to have skin in the game. You know, dad will pay $100 to go see a sporting game. And then everyone was like, why isn't it free? And I was like, you need skin in the game. You value, you know, like where your treasure is, your heart is. And I actually originally gave it all away for free, and none of those dads finished it. The second you put a price tag on it, they're like, I must have some value. But then I realized, hey, if I wanted this to address like a larger audience, I needed to write something like challenging but accessible that the typical dad would pick up and they could read it in a day if they want. I just talked to 3 dads who said, I read this in one day. And that's my vision. And so I basically saw there was a little bit of a generational need. If this book was already written, I would have just used it. But I felt like I had to take the best of like 7 or 8 books and mash them together to sort of produce this. So yeah, I wanted the typical dad with a heart of love to feel like here's a practical plan I can use and then be able to do it. So
Amazing. So that's a good setup. You talked about the 5 kinds of like fathers, parents. So let's kind of go through these these 4 sort of markers, anchors of being an intentional father and what you've learned along the way. So, you know, you sort of kind of gave us the introduction, but now it's sort of preparation. And, you know, again, not giving away too much because we want people to go get the book, but in one of them, it's honoring your father. And I find that interesting. I've had a really amazing example as a dad, as someone who's been adopted, and then having my adopted dad just be the most incredible role model. And it's actually a little emotional because my dad actually just had a heart attack last week.
I'm so sorry.
And we, thanks. And we were sort of like processing that, and he's doing well now, but in recovery. And it actually, Jon gave me some reflection on my dad. And what was it about him? And he loved God faithfully. He was courageous. He was a missionary, right? So that's how I got adopted, because they were missionaries in the Philippines. Wow. And watching my mom and dad, and my dad especially, sort of lead our family in incredible faith, hope, miracles, healings, overcoming, you know, back then when there was no Google or internet, and we're sort of like away from Canada in the Philippines. And just realizing sort of the imprint of my dad, and literally he was in media and television, and here I am years later in that. So I'm like, oh, honor your father. That's easy. I can do that. But for a lot of people who are listening and watching, that's a struggle. That's a block.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think, you know, I've been pastoring for 16 years in New York City. A lot of very sort of like successful people, almost all of them, or so many of them, are driven by deep father wounds. Haven't been blessed, feel like they couldn't live up, had something to prove. So, you know, we have a responsibility, I believe, as parents, particularly as dads. You know, Rolheiser says, whatever pain is not transformed is transferred, which means that if we don't deal with it, we're going to pass it on to our kids. And it manifests itself particularly under stress. Anyone can do well when you're doing well, but when you're not doing well, that's when the pressure comes out, and parenting is one of those high pressure moments. So yeah, maybe 25% of the book is an attempt to help people come to terms with their own childhood, deal with their own story, deal with their own father wounds. And the other big, number one is acknowledging you've got them. I think number 2, another thing that a lot of folks do wrong, or a mistake they fall into is when they say, I'll never be like my dad. But the reason that's unhealthy is because you're making your dad's behavior the default line instead of asking the question, what does my kid need? And it turns out your kid may need a little bit of what your dad was like, but there's so much pain there that we just avoid that. So it can be very, very challenging to have the emotional distance, the sense of healing, to process, to let God heal the inner life, so that you can then look at your kid and then say, what do they need? How do I give the best of my story to them? How do I dam the brokenness that's coming through our generations? And then how do I build something forward? Yes, so it's very, very important. And I think, honestly, God in his kindness, every parent, when they get ready to have a kid, has the fear of God fall on them. Like, oh my gosh, like you look around at the world and you think, do I want to bring a kid into this craziness? And then you think about your own story, you think about your finances, you think about your marriage, you're like, are we ready? No one ever feels like, no, we're completely ready for this. So you've got that sense of terror, but you know what? Life keeps going. Before you know it, you just get used to it and you just go on. And that sort of intentionality, that urgency to deal with your own drama just gets buried under the busyness of life. So I think it's very important to take a season. You owe it to yourself for your own healing to really reflect on your family of origin stuff. And then to honor the good parts and to weep for the broken parts and to remove the broken parts. And then that gives you sort of like your own wisdom. You don't have to always pull out someone else's book. You're reading off the story of your own life, what God's done in you and through you, and being able to sort of codify that as family wisdom to speak out of, I think, is very, very powerful. So yeah, huge part of it. You've got to do that deep work, or you just pass the stuff forward unintentionally into the life of your kids.
That is so good. And I love that, because that's so much about being intentional.
Yeah.
Being intentional about working on the hard stuff that you might not want to confront about yourself or family of origin.
Yeah.
But I think that's a good reminder that if we don't, it can definitely be transferred to our kids and to our home life and what kind of home we live in. And, that's really powerful. That's good. That's good preparation. So that's a good one. Okay. Then we move into initiation. Talk to us about that. You have in there like values and, this, but initiation, we don't use it a lot. I think we think initiation like sororities or fraternities and, you're initiated into, but that's exactly it. Initiated into, parenting, being a dad.
Yes. So, I mean, one of the things, like if you basically study almost every human society except late modern society, they had conscious pathways to initiate young people into a journey into adulthood. There's something happens in us in our early teenage years. Our bodies are being filled with chemicals. They're changing. Our strength is increasing. Our energy is going up. We're feeling erotic energy for the first time in our lives. We're wanting to test ourselves, challenge authority. All of that energy needs to be directed somewhere. Otherwise, we'll sort of like burn the village down. You know what I mean? We've got to like figure out how to channel these energies that we're facing. And so societies like James Hollis, who's a Jungian psychology, says that all societies basically, almost like they had a blueprint without ever talking to each other, took young people through 6 conscious steps. And the first step is like the removal of the environment of childhood, like often by force, like they would just come in the night and take you. Then they would have a death of childhood ceremony, like some sort of moment where like your naivete was put to death. Then you were basically given the tradition of the community. You were given its religion, you were given its story, and then you were given the roles that were required of you to participate and serve the community. Then you went on a great ordeal, and the ordeal was basically to test whether or not you'd learned it on your own. So in Australia, like young Australian Aboriginals were sent out into the outback where everything you see will kill you and there's no water for up to 6 months. And at the end of that, they would know, I can handle anything. Like I've got it in me. I've got it in me to handle life. Wow. So these external values that have been given to me are now internal values I live out of. Then there's a recognition ceremony when after you complete the ordeal, people said basically, way to go, we recognize you. And then they were integrated back into society to serve society. Okay, so that is like almost universal. Now, what happens to a young person today? All of our moments are like almost accidental. First exposure to porn, bullying, overemphasis on education, grades, and performance, sporadic little bits of religion, into YouTube clips, or sporadic church attendance because parents are busy or they prioritize sports above your spiritual formation, pressure to go off to college, go to college unformed, deal with temptation, and then try and recover in your 20s for some sort of morality and meaning. And we've got to do better. We owe our young people something better than that. An accidental life of self-initiation is killing young people. Look at the suicide rates, depression rates, anxiety. What they're basically saying with all of their acting out is like, wiser person, please guide me. And we're simply saying, no, we're too busy. And so the key is intentionality to say, I will guide you. I'll give you what I've got. Now, the challenging thing is young people don't often give off the vibes like that's what they want or that's what they appreciate. They're often giving like vibes that like, you can, like take off, please. But underneath all of that, what they want to know is to be loved. I remember once I was like, my daughter was being disciplined by me. And years later, I said, I'm sorry, I was pretty hard on you in that season. And she said, you know what? All of my friends said to me, I wish my dad would discipline me like that because it showed that he would love me.
John, do you want to just say, last year, I had the same thing. We had a high school reunion, or a year or 2 years ago. And I was sitting with my girlfriends who had an amazing... They had no curfew. They could do whatever they wanted. I was always curfewed, and it drove me crazy. And I was mad at my parents. I said really harsh things to my parents about it. And so we're sitting around on a patio talking about high school. And one of my girlfriends says to me, I want to say this to Melinda because now we're at this stage in age. And I look back and I know you were so mad at your parents because they were like 12:30 home. And if not, then we're going to pick you up or whatnot. Yeah. And you'd be so angry and you'd be swearing at them. And yet every one of us who could just stay out till 2 a.m., 3 a.m., deep down we're like, I'm so jealous because Melinda's parents cared. Like actually care about her well-being, and her well-being, like where Melinda will be because, after midnight, everything, And I looked at them shocked. I'm like, are you kidding me? They're like, your entire senior year, we were jealous of you because your parents gave you boundaries, they gave you curfew, and we had nothing. And you were jealous of us because we had this freedom to do whatever we wanted, and yet we were jealous of you.
Now, probably
just what you said kind of was like, whoa.
Yeah, and I think, I always with my kids tried to say, what is the way of wisdom? Is this wise? Like I would always say to them, I'm not trying to punish you. Because before you know it, you're going to leave this home and do whatever you want. I'm trying to teach you the way of life, the way of wisdom. And I always try to get them to ask, who will you be in your late 20s, your early 30s, if you do this? Think long term, think beyond this moment. And I'd always use their previous season as an example. Like with my son, I would say, hey, do you remember when you were obsessed with Legos? Like, how important is Lego to you right now? He's like, not at all. I was like, did you voluntarily load all of those sacred Legos into a box and just give them to some kid? Yes. I know it's hard to comprehend, but all the things you cherish right now will feel like that one day. Do not harm yourself. Do not give in for these things that when you're older, you will look back on. It's just Lego, man, but later, And so you don't want to just tell them trust me, I love you. You've got to explain why. You've got to give them a vision about why the way of Jesus is the way of life. And I think that's what my kids are most grateful for. And I got to tell you, maybe the greatest top three moment of my life, I don't want to embarrass her. I don't think there's a chance she'll ever hear this. But when my daughter was walking around college, introducing me to a new friend, she said this, I want you to meet my dad. He is literally the wisest person you'll ever meet. That was her voluntary descriptor of me. She was excited for her friends to meet me because she genuinely believed my dad is wise. And my wife pulled me aside that night and she said, I hope you feel like those years of pouring yourself out were worth it in that one moment. That is your adult daughter recognizing you amongst her peers. And I just like sat in my room crying, like it was all worth it. Thank you. Because I tell you, she didn't think I was the wisest person necessarily all the way through.
No, I know
So,
that. And, there's one day where I'm like, I hope they get it, why we're doing this, why these hard conversations have had to happen, why we've chosen not to do things, or, like, and it's hard, when your kid rejects you or says things and you know that, we know it's best for them and they're not understanding it. And then we explain it. Like we really, my husband Chris and I really are about around the table having really honest conversations and safe conversations. But it's, there are moments, John, we're like, will it pass?
yes,
Will they get it one
yes.
day?
Well, I mean, both my
you
kids
know?
are in college now, and I'm like, it's the truest statement is the days are long, but the years are short. I mean, it's just
Yes.
so
But
true.
my dad used to tell me. That's what my dad used to tell me,
Really?
Melinda. Days are long, yeah. Days are long, years are short, and especially because now he's turned 79.
Wow.
He's like, that's how
Wow.
he's like, that's how I feel every day. Still,
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, okay, that's amazing. I really am. I'm learning a lot, lots of wisdom from the wisest man. I love that. Next one we move into is
Yes.
formation. You have rules to master. You have these 5 shifts. What does that look like for parent dad who's like, okay, so we've gone through preparation, this sort of initiation and values, and now it's this
Yeah, well,
formation.
it's all based on like a very simple idea. And here's the idea. Like one day your kid is going to leave your home. That's it. And I'm telling you, like this has happened twice to me. And that the finality of those years hits you. Like I have a wonderful relationship with both my kids. But it's different now. They're not under my home. They come back by choice, but they're their own people. They have their own mentors and peer groups and all that. And so I was like, you got this sacred window. And so I said, what I wanted to do was ask the question, what do I want my son to know? Who do I want my son to be? What do I want him to be able to do before he leaves this home? And then how do I create experiences? And how do I come up with the information and skills he needs for that to happen so that when he leaves with his 2 suitcases full of stuff, that like he's able to look back and say, I've got what it takes to navigate the next season of my life. And so that was the big vision. That was the big vision of formation, which is like, I've got these with my son in particular. It's like, I got these 6 years. How do I not waste them? And then like immediately I have people push back and they go, 6 years, that's too long. I'm like, he's going to be in your home for 6 years anyway. It's not like, well, I wish it was 2 years, therefore I'm going to ship him off when he's 14. It's not how it works. So yeah, how do you then consciously begin to basically reverse engineer? And I just got a huge calendar out and worked backwards. And I said, I'm going to spend a season consciously working through these specific things. And and in the middle of that, I realized like there's basic sort of like roles, intuitive in the male psyche, that a young man's going to need to get right. He's going to have some confidence in these. So you're like, how does a man interact with women? Like, women are a deep mystery. It's going to be very confusing. It's like, you'll never understand us, and we demand that you understand us all at the same time. It's like, oh gosh, that's so paralyzing. So how do you teach him? What about like masturbation, pornography, sexuality, cohabitation before marriage, the pornification of everything? Like, how do you navigate that? What do you do when you're attracted to that, but you realize this is outside of God's timing or boundaries? So it's like, okay, I got to talk about that. And then, how do I help him be a follower of Jesus? Like, what's that even mean? So, what are the core things? So, I basically just spent a lot of time thinking about the vision I had for my son. And I can tell you, if people would say, like, what have you done different than other dads? A lot of dads have some have done better jobs than me, but I'll say this, I spent so much time thinking, considering, meditating, asking the deep questions, sitting with my thoughts for hours at a time, brainstorming, a whiteboard, and it actually was like a gift to me when it came to my own formation, because I realized I had these huge holes in my own formation, stuff nobody had ever taken me through. And so it was actually a chance to fill in some of those gaps. So if you to ask yourself, if you had 3 months to teach someone everything they needed to know about Jesus for the rest of your life, like what is the most important things you'd cover in 12 weeks? Well, like you're like, oh gosh. So number one, you'd probably get a touch lazy and you'd be like, let me just buy like 12 things every Christians need to know. And then you're like, no, that's not it. They're missing stuff. So I just spent like, when I stand before God, I want to be able to say, Nate, here's the sacred deposit that was given to me. Here's what they are. So I went through that category by category. And then I think one of the big ideas was trying to like design shifts so that your son can see he's moving from boyhood into adulthood. Like we grow best when we feel best about ourselves when we're making progress. Like we see, hey, I'm on the path, I'm going somewhere. Imagine running a marathon and there was no mile markers and you were just like perpetually tired, wondering how much longer. So I wanted to design some points where my son could see, hey, I'm moving along. I'm not just chronologically older, but I'm developing into a man. And here's some of the things that mark that out. So yeah, it was a combination of like skills, time, knowledge, big challenges, daily devotions, all put together under these headings with some markers so that he would know he was making progress from adolescence into manhood. And yeah, that took several years, look, I mean, you can do whatever version you want of this. I mean, you could do it as simple as like, here's a Bible verse of the day, here's a quote a day, and here's one question of the day. You do that every day over the course of 6 years, you're going to go deep and you're going to work hard to figure that out, but your son will learn a lot, you'll learn a lot. So I'm a pastor, and so I like had a lot of, I think, theological training to draw on. And so like the Bible stuff was easy, but there was other areas where I was like, gosh, I wish I just honestly drove a truck or was a mechanic because I have nothing to offer. And so the other thing I would say in the midst of all of this that really helped me out is drawing on the Christian community. We have such an advantage being in the church. You know, it's not just you and your kids versus the world. You've got mentors, brothers, sisters, other families. Why, people from different ethnicities, socio-economic realities, they can just form this rich tapestry of mentors and guides and leaders to help shape your son. So I don't want parents to think like they have to have all the pressure, but I do want them to accept a lot of responsibility. That combination of like, I got to do this and I'll bring the best people I can to help. I feel like that's a very potent combination for formation.
That's so good, Jon, because I'm thinking about this, and we prepare and study on so many other levels. Driving, university, television, and scripting. Like we do a lot of the work and prep to achieve that or to get that. But a lot of times in parenting, we're not as intentional. We sort of like let things happen as they go. Let life take us on, and we kind of respond and we're reactive to what comes up. And what I'm hearing you say in this formation is that there was great intentionality for you to think, to take the time to work this out, go backwards, have conversations with your son, work with your family, community. And I think that's a good reminder, not only for me, but our viewers and listeners who are saying it takes work, you guys. Like this is not something where you're surprised by outcomes if you haven't done work, right? Like, oh my goodness, how did that happen? Well, there is, a sense of like a responsibility for us as parents to do the work.
Yeah, and I want to frame this. It is definitely hard work. It's heartbreaking work. It's also the greatest joy of your life. I mean, you made these kids. What a miracle. Like they literally exist because you helped create them. It's just staggering. So, I just, if I could say anything, it's like we're intentional in every other area of our lives, and sometimes we wing our parenting out of exhaustion. I would just urge you to reallocate some energy. Save something. Don't come home from the office just spent. Like save something for your kids. Now, obviously, there's going to be stay-at-home, mums and dads, and they're like spent because they're with the kids all the time. But at some point, they will go to school. At some point, you will have larger chunks on your own. And so to me, it's like I always tried. Like my default a lot is no. I'm a massive introvert. I cannot get enough time on my own. So one of the things I would always like consciously discipline myself was to, when my kids would ask, I would say, yes. Dad, you want to play with me? Yes. Dad, do you want to watch this show with me? Yes. A lot of times I was like, I'm tired, but I was like, no, I'll regret this. Yes. Dad, can we go to the mall? Yes. Dad, can we go get cookies? Yes. I want it to be a yes, Dad, not a no out of tiredness, Dad. And it was like there was sacrifice in doing that. But I'm telling you, I've got so many wonderful memories that simply by being there, great things happen. And the intentionality often creates environments of possibility. And it's just like by being there, things can happen that if you're not there, it won't happen. So to me, I mean, I would just say, yeah, put your heart into it. I give you my word, you will wish for these days back, at least some of them. So do what you can now, and then you'll have memories to savor and to look back on, I think, with fondness and joy.
I love that. And I think that really works in when your last point about recognition, what that means is the intentional father. I think you have some more to say with that, John, but I really hear what that is about, doing the work and realizing that you're right. And I think Nathan now is in grade 12 and we're part of a blended family. So I met Nathan when he was 6 years old. And I can't believe he's in grade 12.
Wow.
Like, actually, it struck me just this past while because they're back in school, and I was like 6 and now grade 12, like turning 18 next year. Wow. And it's just like, and I met Sophie when she was 3 and now she's turning 15.
Wow.
So it's just, you're right. Time goes by fast. And, it really has been, and it has been a joy. I mean, being in a blended family, what I like to call a bonus mom, has been, I will say this, I never wanted children. And for a lot of reasons, I was just like, I'm so self-focused and have all these things I want to do in my life. And it was interesting how God kind of brought this part of my life, just never expected. And yet what I have learned as a woman, as someone in ministry and leadership about kids and other-centeredness and parenting and, mother, heart of God, father, heart of God, like all of that has actually really, and I wouldn't say, I think just sort of made me a whole person, woman than I ever thought I could be because of them.
Yeah, I mean,
and the blended family part is a very unique conversation that's been really great for a lot of people that I've met who are in blended families. I've been able to speak and encourage into that space because we've had to really navigate, some of the challenges in that and the joys. So I would say that, kids have really given me sort of this fullness of understanding God as Father and my role and what you're just saying about being a part of a child's life and mentoring them and speaking life into them and seeing them. It's pretty beautiful.
Yeah, love has a way of bringing us out of ourselves towards others.
Yes.
And true joy, true life is always shared joy in life. And, it's like I love my wife so much. We've been through so much together. We'll probably have another 40 years together, still so much to explore and grow. But my kids just opened up different parts of my heart that my wife even couldn't, And they're gifts to be received, not problems to be solved or issues to be resolved or obligations or duties to be. It's a gift to us. And I would say, like just with the idea of like being intentional, the minority of families these days are like traditional families. And so I would just encourage people, like whatever your family dynamics are, move out intentionally, proactively, and with love. And you never know what God will do. You just never know how something can happen or will happen as a result of it. So yeah, there's so much power and intentionality. Start where you are, move out, and see what God does.
I love that. Jon Tyson, you know what? We could talk for a long time about so many things. I was jotting down all these other notes on you. You'll have to come back and
I'd be so happy to. Yes.
Do another interview with us. But that was amazing. And I think I just learned a lot. And I think I think in the beginning, I didn't know this was going this way, but for any kind of struggling or burnt out, tired pastor, ministry leader, or struggling dad, this is the conversation to hear. And I think getting your book, The Intentional Father, a practical guide to raise sons of courage and character is a must get. So go get that. And you can get that on Amazon. Indigo, I was kind of checking it out. It's everywhere. The book you can get. So Jon, thank you so much. Thanks for being with us. And any other last thoughts? Or I think you said it all.
No. I mean, I want to encourage. I want to encourage beat down and overwhelmed parents. Like, stay the course. To not lose heart. Take a deep breath. Get a cup of coffee. Ask for fresh mercy and grace. You never know how a simple word spoken in love can be the key to your kid's heart. So yeah, I mean, just like stay the course, take heart, God be with you, God give you grace, God give you strength, and play the long game. It'll be worth it. It'll be worth it. Yeah.
Jon Tyson, thank you so much. We'll be praying for you and cheering you on as you continue to lead in New York City. Lots happening there, so many things that I know that you're having to kind of manage and navigate and have the great discernment and wisdom. So we'll continue to pray for you as you lead.
Thank you. I covet your prayers. I really appreciate that.
Thanks so much.
Yep.